Some folks say heaven punishes us, but at 73 years old I've learned that true hell lives inside our homes, my dears, and the devil wears the face of those we trust most. My name is Irene, and I'm from Pineville, a small town in Kentucky that nobody's ever heard of. I'm 73 years old now, but it feels like yesterday when it all happened. The gray hair came too early for me, honey. Today I've decided to tell this story for the first time, because I've carried this burden alone for far too long. If you're watching this, tell me in the comments where you're from. I want to know how far this story will reach. And if you can leave a like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Oh, and comment below about your relationship with your parents. You'll soon discover mine, and it might shock you. I was 15 when my mother died, such a beautiful woman. Even when sick, tuberculosis was a death sentence back then, especially in rural areas where good doctors were a luxury for the rich. My mother Eleanor wasted away day by day, but never lost the sweetness in her eyes. She and I were as close as could be. My father Arthur worked all day at the sawmill, respected by everyone, a man who wore his Sunday best to church. Our house was simple, 3 rooms with a dirt floor and a wood stove that blackened everything with smoke on the walls, just a picture of the Last Supper and a cracked mirror my mother received as a wedding gift. It wasn't much, but it was our little corner of the world. Pineville back then wasn't anything like it is today. It was a place forgotten by God, where everybody knew everybody. The Methodist church stood in the center, and on Sundays the square filled with people. After service there was Joe's Bar, where men played pool and gossiped. Women gathered on their porches under the trees to crochet and exchange recipes. Children played in the streets until dark, afraid of nothing. The school was far. I walked almost an hour to get there, often barefoot to save my only pair of shoes. Still, I loved learning. Mama always said I'd be a teacher someday. My daughter's going to escape this life, become somebody, she'd say with that proud gleam in her eyes. She did everything so I wouldn't miss school. Even when she needed help at home, she saved the pennies she earned selling jam to buy my notebooks. Sometimes when her cough worsened, I wanted to stay home to care for her, but she wouldn't let me. Education is the only thing nobody can take from you, she'd say. When Mama got sick, there was no clinic in Pineville. The doctor came from Louisville once a month. When the tuberculosis diagnosis came, he just shook his head, prescribed expensive medicine we could barely afford, and told us to prepare for the worst. Mama listened quietly with a dignity that even the disease couldn't take from her. In her final months, she could barely get out of bed. I cared for her as best I could, gave her medicine, made tea from herbs that our neighbor Mrs. Jenkins taught me about, changed her sweat-soaked sheets at night. When the fever rose, I stayed awake, dipping cloths in cold water to place on her forehead. My father spent more and more time at the sawmill or at Joe's Bar. Can't stand seeing her like this, he'd say, but I think it was easier to run away than to face it. I remember like it was yesterday when Mama passed. It rained so hard it seemed the sky was crying with me. The wake would be held at home as was customary. Neighbors brought coffee, biscuits, and those words of comfort that comfort no one. The candles around the simple coffin made shadows dance on the walls. It was July, Independence Day season, but nobody in Pineville celebrated that year. Mama was loved by everyone. She always had a cup of tea to offer anyone in need, a kind word. Even when the disease consumed her, she still received visitors in bed, trying to smile despite the pain. I didn't leave her side. I sobbed so much that Mrs. Jenkins gave me water with sugar to calm me down. Poor thing, so young and already motherless. That's what everyone said with that pitying look. I hated. The pastor arrived later. It was almost night. Pastor Anthony, an old tired man who served 5 different parishes in the region. He said a quick mechanical prayer like someone who had seen too much death. Then he left in a hurry, saying he had another commitment. The coffin stayed in the living room on the table where we ate every day. They covered the table with a white cloth. The best we had. The flower wreaths that neighbors brought filled the house with a sweet, sickening smell that even today gives me a tightness in my chest when I smell it. That's when my father came up to me. He hadn't cried until then. His eyes, which I always thought were cold as river stones, looked different that day. They had a strange gleam I'd never seen before. Come here, my daughter, I need to show you something, he said, taking my hand. His hand was rough, calloused, smelling of sawdust. I didn't want to leave Mama's side, but he insisted. It's important, he said. Your mother would want you to see this. He led me down the narrow hallway to their bedroom that smelled like Mama, like the herbs she kept in little bags under her pillow to sleep better. Her rosary still hanging on the headboard of the double Bed. The room was small, barely fitting the bed and the wardrobe in the window. A lace curtain she had made by hand, yellowed with time. The weak light from the oil lamp gave everything a ghostly appearance. Mr. Arthur, Mrs. Martha is asking if she can bring more coffee. Someone shouted from the living room, "Tell her I'm coming." My father replied but made no move to leave. Instead he closed the bedroom door. I heard the lock click. I thought it was so we could have a moment of privacy to finally cry together. That's when he turned to me. His face had completely changed. He seemed like another person. He approached me and, for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own father. "Now that your mother is dead, you're going to take her place in everything," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his at first. I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was talking about the housework, the cooking, the laundry, things I already helped Mama with when she became too weak to get out of bed. "Look here," he said, opening the old wooden wardrobe that creaked. He took out a floral dress that was Mama's favorite. "I want you to wear this now." "But Dad, it's Mama's dress." "I can't," I began to say, confused. "Yes, you can, and you will from now on. You're the woman of this house," he said, throwing the dress on the bed. That's when I started to understand. A chill ran up my spine when I saw the way he looked at me. It wasn't a father's look at his daughter. It was something I had never seen before but instinctively knew was wrong. "The people at the wake. Dad, we need to go back," I tried to say, walking toward the door. He grabbed my arm forcefully. "They can wait. This can't. They're in that room where my mother had died less than 2 days before, with her body still in the living room, surrounded by candles and prayers. My father destroyed what was left of my childhood." He covered my mouth with his calloused hand when I tried to scream, while on the other side of the door people prayed the rosary for my mother's soul. Outside I could hear the muffled voices, the restrained crying of some neighbor, the sound of rain on the tin roof inside that room. Time stopped. I felt my body separate from me, as if I were floating. Watching that scene from afar, it was the only way I found to endure what was happening. I thought of my mother, the way she always protected me even when she was too weak to get out of bed, how she held my hand when I was afraid of storms, how she sang to me before sleep even when the cough barely let her breathe. When it was all over, he simply fixed his clothes as if nothing had happened. "Now you're the Eleanor of this house, and this stays just between us. If you tell anyone, nobody will believe you. They'll say it's all in your head, that you went crazy with your mother's death." He opened the bedroom door and returned to the living room to receive condolences from neighbors for his beloved wife, and I stayed there sitting on the floor, shaking, trying to understand how the world could keep turning. After that, when I finally managed to get up, I washed my face in the basin in the corner of the room. In the cracked mirror, I saw that something in me had broken too. The eyes staring back at me were no longer the same. I returned to the wake, sat beside my mother's coffin, and in silence made her a promise. "Mama, I don't know how, but someday I'll get out of here, and he'll pay for what he did." Nobody noticed anything different about me that night. People were too busy with their own thoughts, their coffee, and their conversations about how unfair life is. The only one who seemed to look at me differently was Mrs. Jenkins, who frowned when I passed by her later. I would understand that woman would be the only one to suspect something terrible had happened in that house. Outside, the rain continued to fall, that fine constant rain that seems like it will never stop. In Pineville back then, when it rained like that, the town became isolated. The dirt roads turned to mud. Nobody came in or went out. I felt like the town stranded with no way out, sinking in the mud. The night was long. People left one by one, saying they would return the next day for the burial. Some women offered to stay with me to keep me company, but my father said it wasn't necessary, that we needed this time together to say goodbye to Mama. I was terrified at the idea of being alone with him again, but I didn't have the courage to say anything. Who would believe me? Mr. Arthur was a respected man in town, hard-working, who never missed Sunday service, who was never seen drunk or causing trouble. I spent the night beside my mother's coffin, praying quietly, not to God, who seemed to have abandoned me, but to her, asking that from wherever she would give me strength. Meanwhile, my father slept in the bedroom, or at least pretended to sleep. When the day dawned, and they took my mother's body to the cemetery, I felt as if they were burying a part of me too. The rain had stopped, but inside me the storm was just beginning. The cemetery in Pineville was on a hill far from town. It was a simple place with wooden crosses and some tombstones for those who had more means. The red earth, wet from rain, stained everyone's shoes that day as they threw earth over the cheap wooden coffin. I no longer cried. The tears had dried up. Instead, something cold and hard grew inside my chest, something that would help me survive the years to come. Little did I know that day was just the beginning of my personal hell. That would last years until I found a way out, but that, my dears, is a story for another moment in the video. Look at that, I didn't even realize I've talked so much. Time flies when you're getting things off your chest, doesn't it? If you're still with me, comment below. Stay strong, Miss Irene, so I know I'm not alone in this, and also comment what you thought about this story from my Pineville of yesteryear. The town has grown so much now it even has a prison. Can you imagine? But back then it was just a forgotten spot on the map. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It really helps this old grandma keep telling these stories that have been kept hidden for so long. Sometimes opening up is the best medicine for the soul, and you, my virtual grandchildren, are the best medicine this grandma could have. After my mother's burial, we returned home. That house that would never be the same. The smell of burned candles was still in the air, along with the cheap perfume the neighbors wore. There was a half-empty coffee cup on the table, forgotten by someone, and the silence, a silence that weighed like lead. Arthur, my father, barely looked at me when we arrived. He went straight to the bedroom, got the whiskey bottle he hid under the bed, and sat in the rocking chair on the porch. I was relieved. At least that night he would leave me in peace. I was wrong. It was just the calm before the storm. The very next day, what would become my new routine began. I woke up with him standing next to my pallet where I slept. Get up, Eleanor, there's coffee to make. Confused, I looked at him. Dad, it's me, Irene. The slap came quickly, stinging. I know who you are, but now you're the woman of this house, and the woman of this house is called Eleanor. I realized then that it hadn't been a nightmare, a grief-induced delusion. It was real as the red mark left on my face. From that day on, he started calling me by my mother's name, Eleanor. This Eleanor that at first I corrected him, then I gave up. It was less painful to accept than to receive another slap. Days in Pineville followed their normal rhythm. The church bell rang at 6 noon. And 6 o'clock in the evening. Men went to work, women took care of the house, children played. Nobody knew that inside our wooden house lived a prisoner. My mother's clothes gradually replaced mine. First it was the apron he forced me to wear, then the dresses. He burned my girls' clothes in the wood stove while I watched, unable to do anything. You don't need these anymore. Now you wear what I tell you to. I cried a lot that night, hidden under the thin blanket, biting the pillow so he wouldn't hear. It wasn't just clothes that were burning, it was my identity, my childhood, my life. Her floral dress hung loose on me. I still had a girl's body, but he ordered me to put cotton in the chest to fill it out and look more like her. He braided my hair the same way she wore it. He forced me to use the only lipstick she had already Halfus used, kept as a treasure in a little box in front of others. He maintained the facade of the caring father. The girl misses her mother, wants to wear her things as a reminder, he would say when someone found it strange, and people believed it because it was easier to believe that than the truth. I had to drop out of school. My woman doesn't need education, he said. I felt as if they had torn away the last piece of hope I had left. School was my only contact with the outside world, my only chance to someday leave that house. The teacher, Miss Cecilia, even came looking for me. She was a tall, thin woman with round glasses that made her look like an owl. She knocked on our door one Sunday afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Arthur. I came to find out why Irene isn't coming to class anymore. She's such a dedicated student. My father, in front of others, was the image of cordiality, smile on his face, gentle voice. Well, Miss Cecilia, since my Eleanor passed, the girl needs to take care of the house, and at her age it's time to learn a woman's duties. Isn't it? Education doesn't fill an empty stomach. Ms. Cecilia insisted a bit, talked about the importance of education, said I had a future. She even offered to come give me lessons after normal hours, but my father was unyielding. I appreciate your concern, but in this house I'm the one who decides, and I've decided she's not going to school anymore. I saw in her eyes a mixture of frustration and pity. She looked at me as if apologizing for not being able to do more at that moment. I felt that my last window to the world had closed. After the teacher left, my father pulled me by the arm to the bedroom. Have you been saying anything to anyone? Why did that woman come here? No, Dad, I swear I didn't say anything. She just came because I stopped going to school. He looked at me suspiciously, but this time he believed me. It was the only time I felt grateful for being known as a quiet girl who didn't cause trouble. The months passed. The town's mourning for my mother's death was forgotten. People moved on with their lives, and I remained trapped in that house, living a nightmare that seemed to have no end. My father would leave for work at the sawmill early in the morning and return at noon for lunch. Then he would leave again, and only come back in the evening. Those moments when I was alone were my only relief. But even so, I didn't have the courage to run away. Where would a 15-year-old girl go with no money, no education in a region where everyone knew everyone? In early 1968, almost a year after my mother's death, came the worst part. My father started drinking more, becoming more violent. I think the drink made him confuse fantasy and reality even more. There were nights when he came home drunk, called me Eleanor, and said he had forgiven me for cheating on him, that I could return to his bed. It was as if in his head he wasn't abusing his own daughter, but getting his wife back, a sick and distorted version of her. But still in his head it was her. Sometimes Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor, would come keep me company. She was a lady in her 60s, a widow who lived alone in the house next door. She had white hair, always tied in a bun, and hands wrinkled from years of working in the fields. She always brought something, a piece of cake, a fruit, a scrap of fabric. "How are you, girl?" she would ask, looking at me with those eyes that seemed to see beyond what I showed. "I'm fine, Mrs. Jenkins, as good as can be expected." She never asked directly, but I felt that she suspected. Sometimes she would take my arm and look at the bruises I tried to hide. Other times she would comment on how different I looked, thinner with dark circles under my eyes. "If you need anything at all, my door is always open," she would say. Before leaving, I wished so much I had had the courage to tell her to ask for help, but the fear was greater, fear of not being believed, fear of what my father would do if he found out, fear that even if someone believed me, nothing could be done. In those days, in 1967, in a small Kentucky town, what happened inside the home was a family matter. Nobody interfered. There were days I thought about ending it all. There was a deep well behind the house, and sometimes when the pain was unbearable, I would look at the dark water down there and think about jumping. But then I remembered the promise I made to my mother on the day of her wake, that I would get out of that place, that I would survive, and that promise kept me alive. One day after another to endure, I created a world inside my head, a place where I was free, where I studied, where nobody hurt me. In the worst moments, I would take refuge in this imaginary world. It was as if a part of me disconnected from my body and went there, leaving only the shell to bear. What came after? One day, almost a year after my mother's death, something happened that changed everything. It was market day in town. My father, as always, had gone to work. I took advantage to sneak out to the market to buy a few things that were missing at home. The Pineville Market happened every Wednesday in the central square. It was an event in town. People came from all over to buy, sell, gossip. There were stalls for everything: vegetables, fruit, meat, clothes, trinkets. The smell of fried dough mixed with the perfume of ripe fruits filled the air. I was at Mr. Joe's stall choosing some tomatoes when I heard a male voice behind me: "Miss, careful with that basket, everything's about to fall." I turned and saw a young man I had never seen before. He must have been about 20, suntan skin, light eyes that contrasted with the rest. He was holding my basket, which was about to tip over. "Thank you," I managed to say, blushing. "You're welcome. Are you from around here? I've never seen you in these parts." One explained that I was indeed from Pineville, but that I didn't get out much. I didn't tell him why. "Of course, I'm Ben. I came from Louisville to work on the construction of the new church. I'll be staying around here for a few months." It was the first normal conversation I had with anyone in almost a year. The first time someone looked at me as Irene, not as Mr. for Arthur's daughter who lost her mother, nor as Ella substitute. We talked for a few minutes. He helped me carry my purchases to the corner. I didn't let him accompany me home. I knew that if someone saw and told my father, I would pay dearly. "Can I see you again?" he asked before we parted. I hesitated. I wanted so much to say yes, to feel again that sensation of being a normal person, a 16-year-old girl talking to a handsome boy, but I knew it was dangerous. "I don't know, it's complicated." He didn't insist. He just smiled and said, "I'll be around if you change your mind." I returned home with a lighter heart. For a few hours I forgot my personal hell, but reality was waiting for me at the door. My father had returned early. He was sitting on the porch, his face red with anger, a half-empty whiskey bottle beside him. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice loaded with threat. "I went to the market, Dad, to buy some things we were missing." I showed the basket as proof. He stood up, stumbling a little because of the drink. "And who gave you permission to go out? Who gave you permission to talk to that man?" My blood froze. Someone had seen me with Ben and told my father. In a small place like Pineville, it was impossible to keep secrets. "It was nothing, Dad. He just helped me with the purchases. I don't even know him." It was like throwing gasoline on the fire. He lunged at me knocking over the basket, the potatoes, tomatoes, everything rolled across the dirt floor. You just like your mother. You think I don't know she cheated on me? I had never seen my father so out of control, his bloodshot eyes, his mouth foaming with rage. I tried to run, but he caught me by the hair. He dragged me into the house while I screamed for help. Nobody came. Nobody ever came. That night I thought I was going to die. He beat me with his belt until I couldn't feel pain anymore. Then he locked me in the little back room where we kept firewood and tools. I stayed there for 2 days. No food, no water. In the dark I could hear him walking around the house, drinking, breaking things. At some point I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was on my pallet. Someone had cleaned my wounds, given me water. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed it all, but the pain in my body reminded me it was real. It was Mrs. Jenkins who saved me. She had heard my screams, seen my father dragging me into the house when he left for work the next day. She entered through the back window and got me out of that little room. Girl, this can't continue, she said while passing a damp cloth over my swollen face. You need to get out of here. For the first time I told her everything from the day of my mother's wake. Until that moment the words came out like a dammed river that finally finds a breach in the dam. Mrs. Jenkins cried with me. She hugged me like my mother used to do, and then she made me a promise. I'm going to help you get out of here. I don't know how yet, but I will. Just give me some time to think of a plan. At that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, a weak, flickering light. But it was there. Someone knew my secret. Someone believed me. Someone was going to help me. Little did I know that this escape plan would only be the beginning of another story, even more unbelievable. But that, my dears, is a matter for the next chapter of this story. After that day when Mrs. Jenkins found me in the back room, things started to change slowly, not all at once, not like in the movies we see nowadays where everything is resolved in the blink of an eye. It was slow, painful, but it changed. Mrs. Jenkins started coming to our house more often, always with an excuse ready. I brought a sweet I made. I needed a cup of sugar. I passed by to see how you all are. My father was suspicious. Of course, those eyes of his never stopped watching me, but he couldn't do anything in front of Mrs. Jenkins. She was respected in town, widow of a man who had been a councilman. Even my father, with all his wickedness, knew he had to keep up appearances. In the weeks that followed, she taught me a code. If I urgently needed her, all I had to do was hang a white sheet on the clothesline in the back. From her house she could see it. I never needed to use this signal, but just knowing I had this possibility gave me some comfort. One morning she arrived with a basket full of herbs. She told my father they were homemade remedies to help heal my falls. That's how she explained my bruises in front of him. My father just muttered something and went out to the porch to smoke his hand-rolled cigarette. When we were alone, she handed me something hidden among the herbs. It was a small picture of the Virgin Mary folded in half. Inside there was a piece of paper with 2 words written on it: have faith. I kept that paper like a treasure. At night when my father slept, I would take it out secretly and look at it. 2 such simple words, but at that moment they were all I had. Meanwhile, Ben, the boy from the market, became part of my daily thoughts. I never spoke to him again. Of course, after the beating I took, I didn't even go near the window when my father was home, but sometimes when he went out to work, I allowed myself to look through the crack in the curtain, imagining what a normal life would be like, a life where I could talk to a boy without fear, where I could walk in the square, go to school. It was in one of those moments, looking through the window, that I saw Ben pass by our street. My heart nearly jumped out of my mouth. He didn't see me. He was talking to another man, carrying wood for what must have been the construction of the new church. I stayed there hidden, just watching until he disappeared around the bend. That night I dreamed of him, a good dream, one of those you don't want to wake up from. We were sitting by the river that runs through Pineville, talking, laughing. I was wearing a blue dress, mine, not my mother's, and had flowers in my hair. In the dream, I was free. I woke up to the sound of my father coming home drunk. He had gone out after dinner, a rare thing. Normally he stayed home watching me, but that night he had gone to the bar and came back carrying the smell of whiskey and cigarettes. I stayed quiet on my pallet, pretending to sleep, praying he wouldn't come looking for me. God must have heard my prayers that night, because he went straight to bed and was soon snoring. I sighed with relief and went back to dreaming of Ben. At the end of March 1968, Lent arrived in Pineville. This was an important time. The entire town prepared for Easter. The women cleaned the church, the men set up the platform for the crucifixion, the children rehearsed for the procession. It was one of the few times in the year that the town received visitors from outside. who came to watch the celebrations my father always concerned. With appearances let me go to church during Lent. It was the only time of year I could leave the house without him, as long as I went straight to church and came back right after. It's a sin to prevent someone from going to God's house, Pastor Anthony would say, and not even my father dared to contradict the pastor. One Wednesday afternoon I was returning from church when I saw Ben again. He was sitting on a bench in the square alone. When he saw me he smiled and waved. I looked around nervous. There was no one familiar nearby. Maybe I could talk to him for just a minute. Hi, he said. When I approached, I thought I'd never see you again. I can't stay, I replied, still looking around. If my father knows I talked to you, what did he do to you last time? The whole town commented that you disappeared for days. I lowered my eyes, ashamed. Nothing, I just was sick. Ben didn't insist, but I saw in his eyes that he hadn't believed me. Look, I don't know what happens in your house, but if you need help, I'm here. At that moment, something inside me wanted to tell him everything. Open my heart, ask for help, but the fear was still greater. I need to go, was all I managed to say. He nodded, respecting my pace. I'll be at church on Sunday, if you can come. The following Sunday, I found the courage and went to the service. My father went along. Of course, he would never let me go alone on a normal Sunday, but at least I would see Ben again, even if from afar. The church was packed, everyone in their best clothes, the women with lace veils on their heads, the men with hats in hand. I searched for Ben with my eyes but didn't see him anywhere. My heart sank with disappointment when the service ended and people began to leave. I felt someone lightly touch my shoulder. It was Mrs. Jenkins. Come have some coffee at my house after, she said loud enough for my father to hear. I made a cornbread that turned out delicious. Before I could answer, my father interrupted. She has things to do at home. Mrs. Jenkins, clever as always, was already prepared. But it's quick, Mr. Arthur, and I'll take her home myself afterward. You can go ahead, rest a bit. Sunday is a day of rest, isn't it? My father hesitated. Going against Mrs. Jenkins in front of the whole church would be frowned upon, and he was tired from the work week, probably wanting to drink his whiskey in peace. All right, but don't be long, he finally said, giving me a look that made clear the consequences if I didn't obey. When we arrived at Mrs. Jenkins' house, I understood why she had insisted so much. Ben was there, sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. You two already know each other, don't you? Said Mrs. Jenkins, closing the door behind us. We have little time, so let's get straight to the point. That afternoon the three of us talked for almost an hour. Mrs. Jenkins told Ben everything that happened in our house. I, too ashamed to speak, just confirmed with nods. Ben listened to everything in silence, his face becoming increasingly serious. We need to get you out of here, he said when Mrs. Jenkins finished. This is no life for anyone, much less a girl your age. But how? I asked, my voice almost disappearing. Where would I go? I have no one, no money. That's when Mrs. Jenkins revealed her plan. She had a sister in Louisville, Mrs. Teresa, who could take me in until I got established. The problem was how to leave Pineville without my father discovering and coming after me. I have an idea, said Ben after thinking for a bit, but it will require patience. We can't act immediately, it would be too risky. The idea was simple but ingenious. Ben needed someone to wash the clothes of the workers at the church construction. He would offer me this job with my father's permission. Over time my father would get used to Ben's regular visits to bring and pick up the clothes. Meanwhile we would save money and plan my escape. What do you think? Ben asked me. I thought for a few moments it was risky. If my father found out, I would pay a terrible price, but what was the alternative? Continue in that life until when? Until he killed me in one of his fits of rage, or until I completely lost my sanity. Let's try, I answered, feeling my heartbeat strongly in my chest. That day I returned home with a strange feeling in my chest. It was fear, yes, a lot of fear, but it was also something else, something I barely remembered what it felt like. Hope. The next day Ben appeared at our house. He knocked on the door, formal, respectful. My father answered, suspicious as always. Good morning, Mr. Arthur. My name is Ben. I work at the new church construction. I came to talk to you because we need someone to wash the workers' clothes. Mrs. Jenkins said your daughter might be interested in the job. My father looked at me, then looked at Ben. I could see the gears turning in his head. On one hand, he didn't like the idea of another man having contact with me, even if just to bring and pick up clothes. On the other, the extra money would be welcome. And if Mrs. Jenkins had recommended, how much does it pay? He finally asked Ben. mentioned an amount that was good enough to spark my father's interest but not so high as to seem suspicious. All right. She can wash the clothes but you bring and pick up when I'm home. Understood, yes sir. Ben replied. Serious, can I? Bring the first batch tomorrow. And so our charade began. Twice a week Ben would bring dirty clothes and take the clean ones. At first my father made a point of being present, but over time as he got used to the routine, he began to relax. Sometimes he would let Ben deliver the clothes, even when he was busy with something else. In the brief moments we were alone we would exchange a few words, a look, a smile. It was little, but to me, it meant everything. It was proof that there existed a world beyond those walls, that there were good people out there. The money I received for the washing was delivered directly to my father, but Ben, clever, always put a little extra in the package. And this extra went straight to Mrs. Jenkins, who kept it for me. It was our escape fund, as we called it. June arrived, and with it the 4th of July celebrations in Pineville. Like in every small town in Kentucky, this was an important date. Bonfire in the square, dancing, moonshine, traditional sweets. The whole town participated. My father surprisingly said we would go to the celebration. I was suspicious of course he never let me go out. Why would it be different now? But I soon understood it was another of his performances, the dedicated father taking his daughter to have a little fun after the loss of her mother. The public image he tried so hard to maintain. On the night of the celebration, I put on the dress that had been my mother's, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only presentable one he let me wear. When I came to the living room, he looked me up and down, and for a moment I saw that gleam in his eyes that so terrified me. You look just like her, he said, his voice choked with emotion, or with the whiskey he had already drunk. I can't say. In the square the bonfires were already lit. The smell of roasting corn and sweet potatoes mixed with that of the moonshine heating up. Children ran. Adults talked. Couples courted in the darker corners. A normal scene of a 4th of July celebration in a small town, but to me it seemed I had entered a parallel world, so distant was I from normal life. My father soon found his friends from the sawmill and joined them near the barrel of moonshine. He ordered me to sit on a bench where he could see me, and that's what I did. I wouldn't dare disobey, not there with so many people around. That's when I noticed Ben on the other side of the square. He had also seen me, but had the good sense not to come talk to me directly. Instead, he passed by where Mrs. Jenkins was sitting with other ladies and whispered something to her. Minutes later Mrs. Jenkins came to me. Come with me, girl. Let's get some moonshine to warm up. I looked at my father, who was already engrossed in conversation and drink. He nodded, giving permission. I followed Mrs. Jenkins to the moonshine stand on the opposite side from where my father was. Ben was waiting for us a little farther away in the shadows. All set, he said, as soon as we approached. The bus to Louisville leaves next Tuesday 4 a.m. I'll pick you up at 3 o'clock when your father is sleeping. My heart raced. Tuesday, 3 days from now. It was so close, and yet so far. What if he wakes up? What if someone sees us? I asked, fear taking over me. It won't happen, Mrs. Jenkins reassured me. I'll put a sleeping pill in his coffee the night before. It's strong. It will make him sleep all night. I have a friend who will drive us to the main road, added Ben. Everything will be fine. You'll see. I returned to the bench, trembling inside, but trying to stay calm on the outside. 3 days. In 3 days I would be free. The idea seemed as unreal as one of my daydreams. The celebration continued until late. When we returned home, my father was already drunk. He fell on the bed, still dressed, and was soon snoring. I, on the contrary, couldn't close my eyes. I kept thinking about the plan, everything that could go wrong, everything that could go right. The next 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Each minute seemed like an hour. Each look from my father made me wonder if he knew, if he had discovered our plan, but he acted normally as far as possible for someone like him. On Monday, the eve of the escape, Mrs. Jenkins stopped by the house with a cornbread for the afternoon coffee. She said, winking at me in a way only I saw. The bread had the promised sleeping pill. Of course, that night I served a generous piece to my father, along with a sweet coffee as Mrs. Jenkins had instructed. He ate without suspecting anything. An hour later he was sleeping deeply. I risked calling his name, poking him lightly. Nothing. He didn't move. The sleeping pill had worked. With my heart pounding, I began to pack my few things, a change of clothes, the small picture that Mrs. Jenkins had given me, and the money we had saved hidden in a small pouch sewn into the hem of my skirt. I sat on the pallet and waited, staring at the old clock on the wall. Each tick-tock was like a hammer in my chest. It was only a few hours to freedom, or to the biggest Mistake of my life. That night on the eve of my escape, I packed my few belongings. In an old burlap sack. I didn't have much to take. A change of clothes, a broken comb, my mother's medal of the Virgin Mary, and the money Ben had given me wrapped in a piece of cloth and sewn into the hem of my skirt. It was all I had in the world. I hid the sack under my pallet, heart beating so hard I thought my father could hear it from the other room. He had come home from work earlier that day. He was quiet, too quiet at the time. I thought it was just fatigue today. I know it was the calm before the storm. Mrs. Jenkins had passed by earlier with a cornbread as she always did on Mondays. But this time the bread had a special ingredient, a strong sleeping pill she got from the pharmacist in town. Give a good-sized piece to your father after dinner with a sweet coffee to disguise the taste, she instructed me in a whisper. I prepared dinner like any other day, grits with sausage, collard greens, beans. I served my father, who ate in silence, watching me in a strange way. Every now and then he would take the whiskey bottle and drink straight from the neck. You're quiet today, Eleanor, he said suddenly. I felt a shiver down my spine. Even after so long I couldn't get used to being called by my mother's name. Just tired, Dad, I replied without looking him in the eye. Tired of what? Of washing clothes for your little boyfriend. My blood froze. I continued stirring the pot as if I hadn't heard right. What boyfriend, Dad? I don't know what you're talking about. He hit the table hard, making the plates jump. Don't play dumb. You think I don't know you? Think I don't have eyes and ears in this town? I was paralyzed, the wooden spoon still in my hand. This was it. He had found out all my plans, all the hope I had built over the last few months. Everything was about to collapse, but then something unexpected happened. He got up, stumbled a bit. He was already drunk and got more whiskey. Then he sat back down. Tomorrow we'll settle this. Tomorrow I'll show that boy who's boss in my house. Tomorrow he was planning to do something tomorrow, but tomorrow I would already be far away if everything went right. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. There's cornbread for dessert, Dad. Mrs. Jenkins brought it today. He looked suspicious. That nosy old woman. I'll have a talk with her tomorrow too. Even so, he accepted the piece I served. He ate it with sweet coffee as Mrs. Jenkins had recommended. I ate a small piece too from another part of the bread which she had marked so I would know which was which. We finished eating, and he went to the bedroom taking the whiskey bottle. I stayed cleaning the kitchen, listening attentively for any noise. After a while, the snores began. The sleeping pill was taking effect. Mixed with the drink, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my pallet looking at the straw ceiling, counting the hours. The night seemed to never pass. Every noise startled me. A cricket singing, the wind in the leaves of the mango tree in the yard, the hoot of an owl in the distance. When the church clock struck 2 in the morning, I got up silently. My father's snores continued, heavy and rhythmic. I took my already prepared burlap sack and went to the door. It was locked. The key, which normally hung on a nail beside it, wasn't there. My heart accelerated. Where could the key be? I went to my father's room. Tiptoeing, the door was ajar. I pushed it slowly, trying not to make noise. He was lying on his back, snoring loudly, the empty whiskey bottle beside the bed, but I didn't see the key anywhere. That's when I noticed something shining on his chest. The key. It was hanging on a chain around his neck. My father had never done this before. He had never locked the door and hidden the key like this. He knew. Somehow he knew about my escape plan. I left the room in panic. What to do now? Ben would be waiting for me in less than an hour. If I didn't show up, he would come looking for me, and then I didn't even want to think about what my father would do to him. I looked around, desperate. The house didn't have many windows, and the ones it had were too small for me to pass through except the window of the little back room where my father kept the tools. It was a bit larger than the others and faced the backyard. I went there and tried to open it. It was nailed shut. My father had nailed the window with boards. He had really thought of everything. I sat on the floor feeling the tears come. I was trapped. There was no way out. All my dreams of freedom, all the plans we had made, all in vain. But then I heard a light noise coming from the front door. Someone was trying to open the lock. My heart raced. Was it my father who had woken up? But he was in the bedroom. I could hear the snores. I cautiously approached the door. The noise continued, metallic, as if someone was using a tool to open the lock. Irene, I heard a soft voice from the other side. Are you there? It was Ben. He had come earlier. I ran to the door. I'm here, I whispered back, but the door is locked and my father has the key. Step away from the door, he said. I'll try to open it with this. I heard more metallic noises. He must have been using some construction tool to force the lock. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard a click. The door opened slowly and There was Ben, a relieved smile on his face. Let's go quickly, he whispered. Taking my burlap sack, Mrs. Jenkins is waiting on the road with a car. I hesitated, looking back to the room where my father slept. What if he woke up now? What if he caught us fleeing? As if reading my thoughts, Ben took my hand. Everything will be fine, trust me. We left the house, closing the door as silently as possible. The night was clear with a full moon that illuminated the path. We walked crouched through the yard, passing by the corn in the garden, until we reached the back fence. That's when we heard it, an angry shout coming from the house. Irene, my father had woken up. The sleeping pill hadn't been strong enough, or perhaps his hatred was stronger than any medicine. Run, shouted Ben, pulling me by the hand. We ran like I had never run in my life, through the pasture, the cornfield, until we reached the dirt road. Mrs. Jenkins' car, an old Ford belonging to her brother, was their engine running, headlights off. Get in quick, she shouted through the window. We had barely gotten into the car when we saw my father appear at the bend in the road. Even at a distance we could see he was carrying something in his hand, something that gleamed under the moonlight. It's a shotgun, shouted Mrs. Jenkins, flooring the accelerator. The car took off with a jolt, raising dust from the dirt road. I looked back and saw my father pointing the gun in our direction. There was a blast and something hit the back of the car. Get down, shouted Mrs. Jenkins. We ducked in the back seat, Ben covering my body with his. There was another shot, but we were already too far away. The car bounced on the potholed road, but each second took us farther from that man, that house, that hell. When I finally had the courage to raise my head, we were already on the main road. The lights of Pineville had been left behind ahead of us, only the dark road and the promise of freedom. We did it, said Ben, holding my hand. You're free, Irene. Free, such a simple word, but for me it meant everything. I looked out the car window at the starry sky, and for the first time in years I breathed without the weight of fear in my chest. But freedom has its price, and I hadn't yet paid mine in full. Mrs. Jenkins drove for hours, until we reached a larger town, where we would catch the bus to Louisville. The plan was for me to go to her sister's house as arranged. Ben would finish the work in Pineville, if he could still return after what happened, and meet me in Louisville a few months later. While we waited at the bus station, sitting on a hard bench, Mrs. Jenkins looked at me with those wise eyes and said something I never forgot. Girl, life is like a river, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, but always flowing forward. No matter what happened back there, the water doesn't return, it just flows, finding new paths, new places. That's how you have to be now, like the river that flows forward without looking back. I nodded, understanding the wisdom of those simple words. I was like that river now, moving forward, leaving behind the frightened girl I once was. The bus arrived punctually at 4 a.m. I said goodbye to Mrs. Jenkins with a tight hug. That woman had risked everything for me, a girl she barely knew. I will never forget that gesture. Ben accompanied me to the bus door. We looked at each other for a moment, not knowing what to say. There was so much between us, fear, hope, perhaps even love, but words seemed too small to express all this. He took a small package from his pocket. For you to remember that not all men are like your father. It was a locket, simple, made of brass. Inside there was a small newspaper clipping with a prayer to St. Benedict, protector against evil. I'll wait for you in Louisville, he said, giving me a quick kiss. When all this is over, when it's safe. I entered the bus with my heart full of contradictory emotions, happiness for finally being free, fear of the unknown that awaited me, anticipated longing for Ben, and a strange feeling that my past wasn't yet finished with me. I didn't know how right I was. When the bus departed, I looked through the window at the two figures that became increasingly smaller on the platform, the two people who had saved my life. I promised myself that one day I would repay this favor. Somehow the bus continued down the dark road, taking me to an uncertain future, but for the first time in years a future that I myself could choose, and that, my dears, was already a huge victory. But destiny, as I've said before, is a funny thing, and my story with my father hadn't yet come to an end. He would still return to my life years later when I least expected it, and the final confrontation would be much more terrible than any of us could imagine. But that's a matter for the next chapter, where I'll tell how I finally freed myself from the ashes of my past and was reborn as the woman I am today. I arrived in Louisville on a cold July morning in 1969. I'll never forget the feeling of stepping into that huge bus station with so many unknown people passing hurriedly. I, a small-town girl who had barely left her own town, felt as small as an ant in that human until Mrs. Teresa, Mrs. Jenkins's sister, was waiting for me as arranged. She was a lady younger than her sister with black dyed hair, and a welcoming smile. She hugged me, as if she had known me for years. Welcome, my child, here you'll be safe. Her apartment was small in an old building downtown, nothing luxurious, but to me it seemed like a palace. It had running water, electricity, a gas stove, things that in Pineville were luxuries for rich people. In the first few days, I barely left the room. The noise of the big city frightened me, the honking, the sirens, the constant movement of people on the street, and the fear that somehow my father would discover where I was and come to get me. Why Teresa respected my pace. She left me alone when I needed it, but also encouraged me to take small steps. Today we'll go to the bakery on the corner, she would say. The next day it was the market, then the more distant store. Gradually I got to know the neighborhood, the city life. The city pulsed in a different way at that time. It was 1969. Man had just stepped on the moon. Beatles music played on the radios, and even in America there was a feeling that the world was changing for me. Coming from a place where time seemed to have stopped, it was like entering another planet. 2 weeks after my arrival, Mrs. Teresa called me for a serious conversation. Irene, you can't stay hidden forever. You need to build a new life, and for that you need documents, education, work. She was right. Of course I couldn't live in the shadow of fear forever, and so my new life began. First, the documents. My birth certificate had been left behind in my father's house, but Mrs. Teresa knew people at Louisville City Hall with some LD stories and some favors. Called in. I got a duplicate. With that I could get an ID card, enroll in night school. I started working as a maid in the house of a rich family in the Highlands neighborhood. The lady of the house, Mrs. Clara, was demanding but fair. The salary wasn't much, but it was enough to pay for a small room I rented near Mrs. Teresa's house and still send a little to Mrs. Jenkins as a thank you for everything she had done for me. I worked during the day, studied at night. It wasn't easy, but each page of a book I turned, each subject I learned was like a brick in the wall I was building between me and my past. And Ben, my dear's life doesn't always follow the script we plan. I received 2 letters from him sent to Mrs. Teresa's address. In the first he told that he had returned to Pineville after our escape. My father had gone after him drunk with the shotgun, but the other workers at the construction prevented a tragedy. The town's pastor, Pastor Anthony, heard the whole story and called the police from Louisville. My father was arrested for a few days, but soon released. At that time, family problems rarely resulted in anything. Ben said he would finish the work on the church in a few months, and then come meet me in Louisville as we had arranged. The letter ended with words of affection, of longing, of plans for the future. The second letter arrived 3 months later. In it, Ben said that the work on the church was almost finished, but that he needed to stop in Louisville before coming to me. His mother was sick. He needed to see her. He promised to come right after. That was the last news I had of him. The months passed. Then a year. Ben never appeared. I didn't receive more letters nor messages for a time. I was desperate, imagining 1,000 things. Had my father done something to him? Had he suffered an accident on the road? Or had he simply moved on with his life? Forgotten me? I never knew the answer. In 1970, I sent a letter to Mrs. Jenkins asking about Ben. The response was short. No one in Pineville had news of him. Since the church construction was completed, he had simply disappeared. Life, however, doesn't stop for us to lament our broken hearts. I continued working, studying, living. I finished elementary school, at night school, then high school. At 20, I was no longer a maid. I had gotten a job as a clerk in a fabric store downtown. It paid better, and the work was less heavy. Louisville was growing visibly at that time. New buildings sprouted like mushrooms after the rain. Asphalt replaced dirt roads. Cars, more and more cars. The city expanded, and I expanded with it. I was no longer the frightened girl from Pineville. I was a woman with a job, a roof, friends, dreams. It was in that store that I met John. He was a fabric salesman from a factory in Cincinnati. Visited the store once a month. A good, gentle man, a few years older than me. We started talking, then dating. In 1975 we married. Our ceremony was simple in the neighborhood church. Mrs. Teresa was there, proud as a mother. Mrs. Jenkins couldn't come. Age no longer allowed long trips, but sent her blessing by letter. It was a happy day, a day I never thought I would live. When I was trapped in that wooden house in Pineville, John knew about my past. Not everything. There are things that are too difficult to tell even to those we love. But he knew I had run away from home because of a violent father. He never pressured me to tell more than I wanted. He respected my silence as my Occasional nightmares, my fears. We moved to a simple house in the Highlands neighborhood. We had 2 children, Mark in 1976 and Lucy in 1978. Life was good, peaceful. Sometimes I almost forgot my past in Pineville, almost, because the fear never completely went away. Whenever I saw a man who resembled my father, my heart raced. Whenever I heard about some violence against women on the news, the nightmares returned, and always I had that feeling that one day the past would catch up with me, and it did. In 1980, 11 years after my escape, I received a letter from Mrs. Jenkins. My father was in Louisville looking for me. How had he discovered where I was? Apparently someone from Pineville had seen me at the fabric store and mentioned it to him. The world is too small, even in a big city like Louisville. Mrs. Jenkins's letter was desperate. He's not right in the head, Irene. After you ran away, he got much worse. Drinks all the time, talks to himself, has fits of rage. He swore he would find you and take you back, even if by force. Be careful. I showed the letter to John. He wanted to go to the police, but I knew it wouldn't help. What would I say? That I was afraid of my father because of things that happened more than a decade ago. Without evidence, without witnesses, nobody would believe it. For weeks I lived in a constant state of alert. I no longer went to work at the store. John insisted I stay home with the children. I locked all doors, windows. I jumped at every strange noise. I started having nightmares every night until one Sunday morning the doorbell rang. John had gone to the store with the children. I was alone. I looked through the window and my blood froze. It was him, my father. Older, thinner, his face marked by drink and time, but still with those eyes that pursued me in nightmares. I didn't answer. I was paralyzed behind the curtain, observing. He rang the doorbell several times, then began to knock on the door, to shout my name. The neighbors came out to see what was happening. He shouted that he was my father, that he just wanted to talk to me, that I was an ungrateful daughter who had run away from home. At some point a neighbor must have called the police, because soon a patrol car arrived. I saw the officers talking to my father, who gestured, pointed to the house. Then they took him away. I thought it was over, that he had given up, or that the police would keep him away, but I was wrong. 3 days later, returning from the bakery, I saw a man standing on the corner watching our house. It was him. When he saw me, he started coming in my direction. I ran inside, locked all the doors. He stayed outside shouting my name, saying we needed to talk, that he was sorry, that he had changed. But I knew that voice. I knew those lies. John arrived from work and found that scene. He tried to talk to my father, ask him to leave, but my father was drunk, aggressive. He pushed John, tried to force entry into the house. That's when John called the police again. This time my father was detained for contempt for disturbance, but he would soon be released again, and he would return. I knew he would return. That night John and I talked a lot. We decided we couldn't continue living like this in fear. We needed to resolve this once and for all. The next day I did something I never thought I would have the courage to do. I went to the police station and told everything, the abuse, the threats, the escape. The officer listened attentively, took my statement. He said that with this he could keep my father detained for longer, perhaps get a restraining order. I left the police station feeling strangely light, as if a weight I had carried for years had diminished a bit. It hadn't disappeared. I think it would never completely disappear, but it was smaller, more bearable. 2 days later I received a call from the police station. My father had been found dead in the cell. He had hanged himself with his own belt. The news hit me like a punch in the stomach. I didn't feel joy, nor relief, nor revenge. I felt nothing, a strange emptiness, as if a part of my history had been suddenly erased. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't shed tears, but that night, sitting on the porch of my house looking at the stars, I thought about the girl I once was, the mother I lost so early, the father who could have been but wasn't, the life I had and the life I built. Despite everything, time passed, the children grew up. John passed away in 2005 from a heart attack. I became a widow, then a grandmother. Life followed its course like the river Mrs. Jenkins had talked about so many years ago. Today, at 73, I look back and see that my story, as painful as it maybe, needs to be told. Not for me, but for all the girls and women who still live their own personal hells, so they know it's possible to survive, to start over, to find peace. I never returned to Pineville. I learned through letters from Mrs. Jenkins until she passed away in 1990 that the town had grown, changed. The church that Ben helped build is still there, they say. Sometimes I find myself wondering if he ever returned, if he looked for me, if he continued his life somewhere else. And what happened to Ben I never knew for sure. A few years ago, my daughter Lucy, curious about my past, did some research on the internet. she discovered there had been a serious accident on the road between Louisville and Pineville in 1969 shortly after the last letter I received. A bus fell into a ravine killing several passengers. The names were never fully disclosed. Perhaps Ben was among them, perhaps not. It's one more mystery that time took away, my dears. That was my story, a story of pain, yes, but also of overcoming, of how a frightened girl from Pineville transformed into the woman I am today. It's not a beautiful story nor easy to hear, but it's real as the scars I carry in my soul. If you've come this far, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy to hear stories like this, but it's important that they be heard so they never happen again, so other Irene don't need to flee in the middle of the night to survive. If you know someone who is living their own hell, extend your hand. Be the Mrs. Jenkins, the Ben in that person's life. Sometimes a gesture of help, however small, can save an entire life. And before I say goodbye, I would like to ask a special favor. If this video touched your heart, leave your like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. This helps our message reach further to other people who might need to hear that they are not alone. From Grandma Irene to you. With all affection and gratitude, may God bless each of your paths, and may you never lack the courage to move forward like the river that doesn't turn back.